Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to hear about the next five-year update to the Lower Kissimmee Basin Water Supply Plan. My name's Tom Kolios. I'm the Water Supply Planning Section Lead at the district. I'll be the moderator for today's stakeholder workshop. This Zoom meeting is being recorded and we'll have it posted in a few days and it'll be made available to the public. The presentations you see here today have been posted already to our district's Lower Kissimmee Basin webpage if you want to view them again at a future time. Again, thanks for joining us. And we have Governing Board member Mr. Ben Butler attending the workshop today as well. This stakeholder workshop is going to have three presentations. I'm going to talk briefly about the plan update process. Then James Behrens, one of our lead scientists, will describe the water resource protection tools used by the district. And then Chad Birchka, the Lower Kissimmee Basin Plan Manager, is going to provide an overview of the draft 2024 water supply plan, and then describe the next steps in the process, including the schedule. About 10 days ago, the draft document was posted to our webpage for your review and comment. And the main purpose of the meeting today is to facilitate your review of that draft document. Chad's presentation will provide an overview with some highlights of the plan contents. Under the Zoom format, all attendees are muted. However, we do want to hear from you. We will have question and comment periods after each presentation, so if you could please hold your questions until then. Your comments and thoughts are critical to ensure the plan update addresses your issues and concerns, so I encourage you to share those with us. I'll now give a brief description of the plan update process. This plan update will follow Florida statute requirements, which states that water management districts need to identify sufficient water supply sources and future projects to meet existing and future reasonable beneficial uses during a 1 in 10 year drought for a minimum of 20 years, while sustaining water resources and natural systems. Legislation was passed in the late 1990s requiring water supply plans to contain the elements listed here on the slide: demand estimates and projections for a 20-year period, source options, resource analyses, and identification of issues. The plan must also contain water resource and water supply development projects. Also, MFL prevention and recovery strategies need to be reviewed and, if necessary, be updated. The district's been divided into 5 planning areas as indicated on the map, basically around drainage basins. The development of these plans for every region is staggered since the same planning team works on each one. And the dates on the map represent when the update for that region was completed or is due for this current round of plans, with a common planning horizon out to 2045. As you can see on the graphic, Lake Okeechobee touches 4 of the planning areas. However, Lake Okeechobee is formally included and addressed in the Lower East Coast Water Supply Plan, which was approved by our governing board last month in September. And the planning horizon for this Lower Kissimmee Basin Plan is 2022 through 2045. Now a little bit about what regional water supply plans, what they do and what they don't do. Really, a water supply plan is a proactive approach toward water supply. We know that there will be increased needs for water in the future and potential shortfalls. So water supply plans provide a roadmap to let us get ahead of those demands by identifying the sources and strategies now on how those demands will be met while still protecting our natural resources. Water supply plans do not authorize permits or adopt rules. And although they do not establish minimum flows and minimum water levels, those are adopted by rule, the MFL prevention and recovery strategies are included in water supply plans. Also, approval of a water supply plan triggers a requirement for local governments to update their comprehensive plan within 18 months of plan approval. I'll go into more detail on another slide on that. We need participation from all stakeholders to get input during the planning process. This provides a balanced approach to reflect the needs of the planning area, and we solicit input and participation at group stakeholder meetings like the one we're having today, during governing board meetings and individual meetings with stakeholders, so we can get more details to incorporate into the plan. The plan has been fully drafted and posted to our website for public review, and we will continue to consider public comments until November 13th. We're conducting our second stakeholder meeting today, and we'll bring the final plan to the governing board for approval in December. Now to talk a little bit about the regional and local linkage. After the water supply plan is approved by the governing board, local governments are required to amend their comprehensive plan within 18 months. So in this planning region, the facility work plans will be due by June of 2026. Also, utilities are required to provide annual updates, excuse me, on the progress of their proposed and ongoing water supply projects. The district's database provides a platform for utilities to submit the updates, and it's currently open right now to enter that information. That's due by November 15th. So that's it for my presentation about the planning process. A couple of housekeeping items. We have maybe a dozen or so participants. Hopefully we can keep the comments to around 3 minutes each. On the slide here are the instructions to raise your hand if you have any questions or comments on my opening presentation. You could do that now. Not seeing any raised hands. Okay, we can move on. Next on the agenda, we have James. He's going to give an overview of water resource protection measures. James, go ahead.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for attending this morning. I'm a lead scientist with the Applied Sciences Bureau at the Water Management District, and I run the water protection program, which I'm going to outline in detail over the next few slides. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Tom. So there are three elements that the water protection group is responsible for at the district. So we run the MFL program, which is the minimum levels, minimum flows, water reservations, and restricted allocation areas. I'll go through all of those three in detail in the subsequent slides. There are also other components that feed into the consumptive use permitting permit application process that leads to people granted these permits for water withdrawals. The other elements that are responsible by another group are these water shortage rules, which are more operation-based, and then these general consumptive use permit rules, which is part of our permitting group. So the three that I'm going to highlight today are those in red. Go to the next slide. So we are under Florida statute, and this is Chapter 373 and Rule 40E-8. We are required to produce an annual MFL priority water body list, which outlines it's kind of like our work plan for the next 5 years. And that'll outline what water bodies are in need of either establishing an MFL, reevaluating an MFL, and then or providing specific protections under restricted allocations or water reservations. So it's our outline for the next 5 years of what we need to prioritize. That then gets approved by our director, executive director, and our governing board. And then that's a requirement that we submit that to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection annually. So specifically related to MFLs, our goal is to identify the point at which these further withdrawals cause significant harm to water resources. We establish these rules using best available information and peer-reviewed science. In our definition of significant harm, and I'm going to show a graphic of this next, is significant harm is represented as a temporary loss of water resources that take more than 2 years to recover, but is less than serious harm. So this may be adopted for either surface waters or aquifers. And we'll go through a list of all of the different MFLs that have been established as well. So the next slide, then we also want to distinguish between, this is also outlined in section 373 of the Florida statute, between a recovery strategy and a prevention strategy. So a recovery strategy is defined for water bodies not meeting the MFL at the time of adoption. And the goal then is to achieve recovery to the established MFL as soon as practicable. So what we do then is outline the various projects that we need to attain to get to moving the water body into a prevention strategy from a recovery strategy. So on the other side of things, we've got the prevention strategy. Those are water bodies that are meeting the MFL, but are not expected to meet it in 20 years. And they're designed to prevent the existing floor level from falling below the adopted MFL. So there's an important distinction between these two. One meaning that there is currently, this significant harm occurring, but we have a plan to resolve that. Versus we are not concerned that there is harm occurring in the particular water body or ecosystem, and then we just go along with the prevention strategy. Next slide. This is the graphic I mentioned that designates what significant harm means. So when we're above this red threshold, we've got these water shortages, and that's anything that takes 1 to 2 years to recover. Where we define significant harm in terms of an MFL standard is anything, as I mentioned, that requires more than 2 years to recover from an ecosystem. And then that is a phase 3 water shortage. And then when we move into a increasing drought in a phase 4, that's defined as serious harm, where you're basically losing all function of your resource, your water resource, and don't expect it to recover. So we never want to get to that point, and that's kind of why MFLs have been established for all of these important water bodies across the state of Florida to keep them functioning over time and resilient to water shortages. Next slide. So these are all the MFLs that have been adopted to date in our district. So those with prevention strategies include the Biscayne Aquifer, the Lower West Coast Aquifer, St. Lucie Estuary, Florida Bay, and Lake Istapoga. Those are the ones that are covered within this water supply plan are noted in orange. And then those with recovery strategies include the Caloosahatchee River, the Everglades, Lake Okeechobee, and the northwest fork of the Loxahatchee River. So the map on the left is basically showing the coverage of all of these different MFLs that protect approximately 6.6 million acres across the whole district. Next slide. So we won't specifically discuss the lower West Coast aquifers and Lake Okeechobee aquifers. Those are covered in the lower East Coast and lower West Coast. We just finished up the whole lower East Coast MFL, so there's a lot more detail in that water supply plan specifically on the Lake Okeechobee MFL. And then the lower West Coast would be in the upcoming water supply plan. I can't remember what year was posted, but that's going to come around in a few years, I believe. So I won't specifically be discussing those, but we do have the Lake Istapoga MFL, which I think is on the next slide. So that's defined in subsection 40E8 as the lands and waters contained within the lake below 40 feet NGVD. The top of the U.S. Army Corps regulation schedule. So we're looking at a lake level of 36.5, and we have designated the violation to occur when it falls below, the surface water falls below that gauge for 20 or more weeks within a calendar year, more often than once every 4 years. So there's both a event and a return interval on that violation characteristic. So if we were to experience a level below 36.5 for 20 more weeks, more than once in those 4 years, that would designate a violation. Next slide. So you can see we do track our MFL performance, and so that would be this graphic on the lower right. That is the water elevation of the specific gauge we monitor, and as you can see, we've stayed above that level consistently since the inception of this rule in 2006. So the dotted line would be the level that we've designated as important threshold, and the lake has remained above that. And we haven't experienced any exceedances or violations since 2006. You can see the graphic of where these sites are monitored. So the lake water level is controlled by the S67 and then the S68 structures in accordance with the Army Corps regulation schedule. We continue to follow the current operational plan and regulation schedule. There haven't been any major operational or structural changes to this system, so we have not underwent a reevaluation at this time. That's typically when we do reevaluate. And so we implement also extreme lake drawdowns when necessary in a manner that will avoid those MFL violations if they were to occur in the future. We've been fortunate that it's been kind of a wetter regime recently, so there haven't been as many water shortages across the district in general. Next slide. So the next tool that we have to use, and this was recently used for the Kissimmee River, is a water reservation. So these are specifically water bodies that are set aside for the protection of fish and wildlife, or public health and safety in some cases. So these are rules that are based on scientifically defensible determination of water needed for the protection of fish and or wildlife. So that again reserves the water from allocation to consumptive uses under certain criteria. And again, this is one of our requirements with our cost share agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers on the federal side, that we need to have these protections in place to initiate and fund these projects, so that the water is ensured to be used for ecological benefits. Next slide. So these water reservations actually do not prevent the use of unreserved water or water allocated under consumptive use permits. They do not establish an operating regime that's done with different tools. They definitely do not drought-proof the system. We still expect droughts to occur, but they allow us to mitigate those effects when they do occur. And they're also designed, again, with wildlife in mind. So those specific thresholds of water levels are tied to the needs of the wildlife in those particular ecosystems. Next slide. So these are the water reservations adopted to date. We've got the Fakahatchee Estuary and the Picayune Strand down in the southwest there. We've also got the North Fork of the St. Lucie River, Tom is showing there, and the nearshore Central Biscayne Bay Water Reservation is one we've been looking at recently, in fact. Caloosahatchee River, the C43 West Basin, and then again, this most recent adoption of the Kissimmee River and chain of lakes in 2021. And that protects those water reservations, protect approximately 350,000 acres across our district. Next slide. So yeah, I just mentioned this already, but the most recent completion was of a water reservation was the Kissimmee River. It's been nationally recognized as a largemouth bass fishery. It is home to endangered wood storks and snail-kite nesting colonies, and has one of the largest concentrations of nesting bald eagles in the U.S. So this is some of the ties I mentioned that the reservation has to fish and wildlife, and considers multiple groups of species, indicator species specifically. Next slide. So this is just showing, I'm just going into detail more because this is just the most recent one that we worked on, but this is just showing a map of the overall water reservation. So it's approximately 172,000 acres and spans a portion of the lower Kissimmee Basin and upper Kissimmee Basin, which is also part of the CFWI planning area. We just went through that public meeting as well. I believe it's posted on our website. The Kissimmee River downstream of S65A is in the lower Kissimmee Basin planning area, and the upper chain and headwaters lakes are primary sources of water for the Kissimmee River. And the reservations have supported that whole restoration project, which has been over $1 billion in public investment and has widely been considered a success. Next slide. The final tool that I will discuss that is also used in comprehensive Everglades restoration planning and can provide water protection from consumptive use is the restricted allocation area. So these are areas from which new or increased water allocations are restricted, often regional in scope for specific sources or areas of the water management district. They're implemented where water for projected needs is insufficient. They protect water for natural systems and future restoration projects, again, as part of that SERP process with the Army Corps. And they may be designated as part of MFL recovery or prevention strategies. Next slide. So this is a map of all of the restricted allocation areas that we've established across our district. So these protect about 4.4 million acres. They include the C23, 24, 25 canal system, and the L1, L2, and L3 canal system. Those are both established in 1981, as well as Lake Istapoga Indian Prairie Canal System, the lower East Coast Everglades water bodies in 2007, as well as Loxahatchee River, North Palm Beach County. We've also got pumps on Floridan Wells and Martin and St. Lucie counties, and also Lake Okeechobee and Lake Okeechobee service area. Next slide. So again, I mentioned before that, these are RA criteria. This is established specifically within this planning region. So for the Lake Ostepoga and Indian Prairie Canal System, the water allocations are limited to existing surface water allocations and existing surface water pump capacity. So no increases in pump capacity. Those are and then Lake Okeechobee and Lake Okeechobee service area, those are specifically tied to historic water use that occurred from 2001 to 2008. So those are the specific rules for the RAAs in this water supply planning area. Next slide. And that is all we have for today. And I can take any questions.
Thank you, James. If anyone has any questions or comments for James, please raise your hand.
We have Stephen Menberg.
Stephen, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Cool. Thanks for the overview, James. Just a question specifically on the upper chain of lakes and Kissimmee reservation. I think maybe there's something we didn't catch on the LEC, but specifically the consumptive use criteria that cover the way folks can get an allocation for and still comply with the reservation, specifically points to LORS 08 and the low subband, which no longer exist. So I was curious if the district has a plan to go into rulemaking to update it so that future applicants can comply.
So you're talking specifically about the Kissimmee River Reservation or about the Lake Okeechobee?
Kissimmee River Reservation. There is what's called a downstream check in the applicant's handbook.
Okay.
And the downstream part of the downstream check and looking at closed at S65, but specifically if you were to successfully obtain a permit for water from that would otherwise be restricted, because there is a small volume of water that's available for folks, you part of the check that you have to do is to do a comparison of current Lake Okeechobee stage versus the low subband of LORS 08.
Right. Okay.
As that no longer exists, that's kind of the question: is the district looking at something to update the criteria to comply with LOSUM?
If you allow me, I will I can provide you with a written response. I don't have specific information on that at this moment, but I can find out for you for sure.
Yeah, it was just because in looking through the plan, the draft plan, there's no mention of it. So obviously, right, through the planning process, you're not going to commit to rulemaking at this time. But I think it's something that, at least from a perspective of future regulatory plan kind of items, that at least something to pursue.
Great. Yeah, thanks for bringing that to my attention.
Sure.
I'll get back to you.
I have some ideas.
All right.
Yeah, I think
Thanks a lot.
we'll have to reach out to our legal staff and regulation staff and get some feedback from them as well.
Yeah, no, like I said, I think there's ways through it, but obviously I have criteria that refers to a lake schedule that doesn't exist anymore.
I'm glad you asked that question again, because that reminded me that you asked it before quite a long time ago, and then I saw it getting passed up the chain to regulation, and I've been meaning to follow up with you, Stephen.
No problem. Yeah,
See
no,
if you got
I
your
didn't.
question answered.
I certainly didn't want to call anything out, Chad. But since I didn't see it in the draft document that went out, and like I said, I think at this point, just to make things whole within the plan, I mean, literally, like, it's a sentence, but like I said, something that might be suitable for the regulatory plan going forward.
And that's one of the items that I covered in my part of the presentation, where I said water supply plans don't adopt rules. So we have to be careful with what we think we want to put in there. But yeah,
Sure.
we're open to hear what you have. Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Anyone else, please raise your hand if you have any questions for James. Not seeing any? Okay. Then we can move on, and Chad's gonna give you an overview of the draft plan.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Chad Birchka, the Water Supply Plan Manager for the Lower Kissimmee Basin. This is my first time doing a water supply plan update. And so we just recently completed the draft of the plan, and I'm excited to present an overview of that to you here this morning. So for those of you that may not be familiar with the Lower Kissimmee Basin planning area, here we have a map showing the extent of the boundaries. And just to go over some of the significant natural systems in the region, there's Lake Istikpoga, the Kissimmee River, and although not located within the Lower Kissimmee Basin planning area, Lake Okeechobee does contribute to a portion of the water supply needs. Most of the water used in this planning region is for the ag industry. And that demand accounts for 94% of the total current demands. With a current total population of about 53,000 people, the Lower Kissimmee Basin has the lowest population of the 5 planning areas in the district. And the associated potable water demands account for just under 3% of the current total demands. So just to touch on public participation here, that is key to ensuring this plan update addresses the issues and concerns of stakeholders. This is our second stakeholder workshop for this plan update. We held the first workshop back in April, at that time presenting the draft demands and chapters 1 through 3 in Appendix A, which were posted at that time for public review and comment. In that first meeting, we also provided an update on the progress since the previous 2019 water supply plan for the Lower Kissimmee, and an update on the water resource development projects, the comprehensive Everglades restoration projects, and other environmental restoration projects. Since then, we've incorporated the comments received and revised the demand projections. We've also been working diligently, putting together the full draft of the plan. That full draft, including the revised versions of the previously posted chapters in Appendix A, were recently posted online for public review and comment on October 14th. Written comments on this draft plan are due by November 13th. And the finalized plan will be presented for governing board consideration and approval on December 12th. And just a note here before we go on, I'd like to mention that we'd like to receive your comments in writing. And I'll provide a little more on how to do that at the end of my part of the presentation. So just to familiarize you with the organization of the contents of the plan, we're showing here that the document contains 8 chapters, 4 appendices, and an executive summary. And I'll summarize those here today, following the outline of the chapters in the plan. And just a note here on a couple of the appendices that haven't already been covered. Appendix B provides detailed information for each of the public supply utilities. And we put together in that appendix some user-friendly tables, including the projected served populations and associated demands, and the water sources and treatment types used for each of the utilities. And Appendix D follows a similar format for the wastewater treatment facilities. So jumping into chapter 1 here, which lays out the objectives and statutory requirements of the water supply planning effort that Tom touched on previously. This slide here takes a quote from chapter 373 of the Florida statutes, stating the main goals of the planning effort, which include identifying sufficient water supplies and future projects to meet the needs of existing and future uses while sustaining water resources and natural systems. Expanding on that, as further detailed in chapter 1, the overall objective is to quantify sufficient water supplies to meet the projected 2045 demands, including during drought conditions, with a return frequency of once every 10 years. We also need to demonstrate that use of those water supplies won't cause harm to water resources and natural systems, while considering things that contribute to water supplies and reduce demand, including planned water supply and water resource development projects, alternative water supplies, and water conservation opportunities. This effort is coordinated with the public and stakeholders, ensuring that the plan is compatible with local government and other planning interests. Each of the water use categories is listed here on this slide. Starting with public water supply, that covers the utilities that pump and treat water to provide potable water to their service areas. Domestic self-supply is the use for individual homes primarily. So you've constructed your own well at your house and provide yourself with potable water, and also maybe for landscape irrigation at your home. Agriculture includes uses, livestock watering, aquaculture, and the bigger uses being irrigation of crops, pasture, and improved pasture and hay. The commercial, industrial, institutional category, that's in this planning area that's primarily dominated by the mining industry, which there are several mines mining sand and gravel in this area. Landscape, recreational, landscape's pretty straightforward. It's landscape irrigation, and recreational includes golf courses and athletic fields. And power generation are the water needs for power generation facilities such as cooling towers and other industrial uses. A note here regarding demand adjustments to the public supply, agriculture, and landscape rec categories. The demand projections in the current draft plan are different than we initially presented and posted for review back in April. Following our first stakeholder meeting and the posting of the draft early chapters in April, we took in public comments. And in June, an amendment to the annual work plan for the Seminole Tribe of Florida Brighton Reservation was approved, including some land use changes. Those land use changes resulted in adjustments to the original demand projections for both the ag and landscape rec categories. And I'll cover that in more detail as we touch on the demands for each of those categories next. We're jumping into chapter 2 and appendix A here. And those contain the demand projections and methodologies that we went over in detail in our first stakeholder meeting. This slide is showing the base year total population of about 53,000 people, and we're projecting a 9% increase to about 58,000 people in 2045. This is the total population in the region, so it includes the domestic self-supplied population as well as those served by utilities. These existing and projected populations are initially based on estimates from the University of Florida's Bureau of Economic and Business Research, also known as BEBR. For those of you who might have been looking at that acronym, wondering what that means at the top of the slide there. These initial BEBR estimates were adjusted slightly to account for additional information that we received during initial outreach efforts. We learned from Okeechobee Utility Authority that they have a new development known as Lakefront Estates with 1,000 homes and villas currently under construction. And also following our first stakeholder meeting, we received some comments and feedback from the Seminole Tribe of Florida regarding their expected growth at the Brighton Reservation and the population they also serve at the Lakeport community. Okay. We're still in chapter 2 and appendix A here. Ag demands are the largest component, the largest water use category in this planning region. There's over 103,000 acres under production, and that accounts for 94% of the existing demands. And we have a projected 12% increase by 2045. On the right is a map showing the existing crops separated by crop type. And with this map, you can get a feel for the acreage under production for each crop type. You can see that citrus and orange and the pasture and hay and kind of a blue color, they kind of stand out the most, and those are the dominant crops at this time. A notable mention, the vast majority of the planning region is actually non-irrigated agricultural lands. Tom's showing there in that beige color. We're projecting a 12% increase in ag demands due to an adjusted increase in the greenhouse nursery category. The existing acreage is shown on the map here. What you see, there isn't currently very much out there in the brown polygons. And so I'll expand on that adjustment to our demand projections next. Okay, there's a lot of information captured on this slide here. We're getting into the details of the existing and projected crop types and comparing that to our previous projections 5 years ago in 2019. In the bar graph on the left, we have our existing base year irrigated crop acreage estimates. And those are based on the Florida statewide agricultural demand, or FSED, geodatabase, which is developed by the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, also known as FDACS. And on the right side of the bar graphs, we have our adjusted projections for the 2045 crop acreages. And these are broken out by the major crop types, which include sometimes some other crop types. Well, at least in the other category. When we first drafted these demand projections and presented them at our first stakeholder meeting, there was a projected decrease in irrigated acreage going from the 2022 base year out to 2045. And that was primarily due to projected declines for pasture and citrus, and some slight declines for all other crop types, except for sugarcane, which remains steady. Following approval of the Seminole Tribe's Work Plan Amendment in June, we made adjustments to the FSED acreages to account for their projected land use changes. And that results in an increase to the projected 2045 nursery acreage, which falls in the other green category shown here. The land use changes also resulted in a bigger decrease to the 2045 improved pasture, since that's proposed to be replaced by the nursery and those land use changes. So these current projections now show an overall 12% increase in total ag demands going from 2022 to 2045. And that projected decreasing acreage trend for all other crop types except sugarcane remains. So if you take a look at compare the two bar graphs for all the crop types, you'll notice that they all do reduce, with the exception of the other category there, and sugarcane. The table at the bottom compares the FSED projections that were in the 2019 Lower Kissimmee Basin plan that we developed 5 years ago. We're comparing those to the current projections. And you can see that a significant reduction was made in these newer estimates, especially just starting out there. And that's based primarily on their observed reductions in the existing irrigated acreages. Okay. The table on this slide breaks out each of the agriculture components and shows the total demand, which includes the two other smaller components, livestock and aquaculture. And both of those are projected to remain steady through 2045. And so as mentioned before, we're noting a total increase in ag demands of 12%. Okay. This table provides a summary of our findings in Chapter 2 and Appendix A, and compares each component of demand to our previous 2019 projections for 2040. The column on the right lists the 2040 demands that we projected 5 years ago in the 2019 water supply plan update. And if you compare the total at the bottom between the 2 years, our 2045 projections are only a 1% increase above those 2040 projections we made 5 years ago. The most notable increase in all of the different use categories occurs in the landscape recreational category. And that's after adjustments were made to account for the land use changes in this category proposed for the Brighton Reservation. The new lakefront estates development contributed to an increase in population and demand projected for public supply served by Okeechobee Utility Authority. And there's also some projected increases in public supply demand for the Brighton Reservation, as previously mentioned. And so you can see there that our public supply projections jumped up a little bit from our previous estimates in 2019. Since there's a correlation with population growth and the commercial, industrial, institutional demands, there's a proportional increase there too. And since power supply for the Lower Kissimmee Basin is generated outside of the planning region, and there are no plans to build new facilities through 2045, demand remains at zero. So as shown at the bottom of the slide, the total projected demand increase for all of the use categories combined, comparing 2022 to 2045 is 16%. Okay. Moving into chapter 3. Chapter 3 covers the topic of water conservation and its potential to reduce the projected demands on the water resource. And the Lower Kissimmee Basin, the greatest potential for cost-effective water conservation occurs in the agriculture use category. Ag uses can potentially save money by reducing their need to pump and move large volumes of water by implementing best management practices as recommended by the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. And those savings are primarily realized by converting or retrofitting to more efficient irrigation systems. Some additional savings can also be realized in the public supply use category by adopting outdoor irrigation ordinances and requiring more efficient plumbing fixtures. Our findings in chapter 3 project a total conservation potential savings in the planning region of about 7 million gallons per day. And those are, that's primarily realized in the agriculture category. Okay. Chapter 4 and Appendix C cover the regulatory water resource protection measures that James covered already today. The map on the right is showing the minimum flow and level water bodies in the Lower Kissimmee Basin, Lake Estikpoga, Lake Okeechobee, and the Lower West Coast Aquifer MFLs extend a little bit into the southwestern portion of the planning area. We have water reservations for the Kissimmee River and chain of lakes, and restricted allocation areas for Lake Estikpoga, the Indian Prairie Canal System, and the Lake Okeechobee service area does extend into the planning area and covers those canal systems that are connected to Lake Okeechobee. Okay. Chapter 5 presents the water supply source options and our strategies for meeting future demands while sustaining the natural systems. This graphic shows the full palette of water supply options in the Lower Kissimmee Basin. Fresh water and fresh surface water. Did I say that twice? Fresh groundwater and fresh surface water are considered traditional sources, and these two sources currently supply over 92% of ag demands. Due to the resource protection criteria discussed earlier, increased withdrawals from regional surface water sources aren't expected, which means we expect new uses and increased allocations to come from groundwater and alternative water supplies. So some examples of alternative water supplies noted with an asterisk symbol on the slide. That includes aquifer storage and recovery, reservoirs and tailwater recovery systems. And those things all can be used to capture excess stormwater for storage and use during the dry season. Also, saline groundwater is considered an alternative water supply and reclaimed water. There are some existing uses of brackish saline groundwater from the Florida aquifer system, and those account for approximately just 2% of the total current demand. That saline groundwater typically is used to blend and supplement surface water supplies and reservoirs and internal canals during drought conditions when surface water supplies are limited. Due to the low population, supplies of wastewater for generating reclaimed water are quite limited in this region, and we're projecting only minor increases in reclaimed water production. Implementing conservation measures and use of alternative water supplies can reduce the need to rely on the traditional sources. And those two things together contribute to help meet future increased demands while ensuring sustainability of the resource. Okay, we're continuing in Chapter 5 and drilling down into groundwater source options here. The graphic on this slide is showing a hydrogeologic cross-section of the entire Kissimmee region, starting from Lake Toho, which is in the upper Kissimmee Basin, and going south, kind of following the path of the Kissimmee River all the way to Lake Okeechobee. So if you can imagine pulling this cross section out of the ground, going down 3,500 feet below land surface, and taking a look at it facing from west to east, you'd see these different layers of geologic formations that comprise the aquifers used in the lower Kissimmee Basin. And as mentioned previously, one of the most used sources besides surface water is the upper Floridan aquifer. The upper producing zone of the Floridan aquifer system, also known as the upper Floridan aquifer, is just below the intermediate confining unit shown in green here. And between that and the first confining unit shown as confining unit 1 here. That confining unit separates the upper Floridan from the Avon Park permeable zone, which has higher salinities, and that's considered saline or brackish. Saline water is defined as water that has chloride concentrations exceeding 250 milligrams per liter or parts per million. The salinity and depth of the upper Floridan aquifer both increase as you go from north to south in the planning region. So as you kind of get near the north end of Lake Okeechobee there, the upper Floridan aquifers there tend to have saline groundwater. The superficial aquifer in the lower Kissimmee Basin is generally thin and has much lower aquifer yields than other portions of the South Florida Water Management District. So in this area, it's typically only used for minor uses like domestic self-supply, livestock water supply, and equipment washing and tank filling. And we're moving from Chapter 5 into Chapter 6 here. Chapter 6 presents our analysis of the surface water and groundwater conditions in the region. And I'll summarize our considerations in that chapter here. The map on this slide is showing the major surface water sources that are supplying a majority of the demands. Increased allocations for withdrawals from those aren't anticipated due to the regulatory resource protection tools that James went over earlier. We also have some major water resource development projects planned in the lower Kissimmee Basin, which we'll discuss next. And those are capable of storing large volumes of excess surface water, and that provides benefits to future water supplies. So therefore, going back to one of the main objectives in the water supply planning effort, we expect surface water supplies to remain adequate to continue to meet through 2045 the permitted demands and the demands authorized in the Water Rights Compact with the Seminole Tribe of Florida. Groundwater supplies are also evaluated in Chapter 6. We reviewed historic groundwater data from monitoring wells as part of that effort. And in this chapter, we present hydrographs documenting the historic water levels, and those indicate no significant downward trends. Since the preferred regional surface water sources are restricted, increases in demand are expected to come from groundwater and primarily the upper Florida aquifer. And noting one more layer of resource protection, increased allocations are subject to the water use permitting criteria, and that requires applicants to demonstrate that increased withdrawals won't cause harm to water resources and existing permitted users. So with the regulatory protections in place and only minor projected increases in demand, we expect groundwater supplies to also remain adequate to meet the 2045 demands. One other thing to note here, the groundwater withdrawals were also evaluated in coordination with the Southwest Florida Water Management District to determine the potential for cumulative effects on their minimum flow and water bodies, including the Lake Wales Ridge Lakes and the Peace River, located within their jurisdictional boundaries northwest of the planning region. The water levels in the upper Peace River and Ridge Lakes regulatory monitor wells, as determined by the Southwest Florida Water Management District and their hydrogeologic investigations, they're currently meeting their target levels, and decreased demands from groundwater supplies are projected for the northwestern region of the lower Kissimmee Basin due to projected declines for the primary crop types there, hay, improved pasture, and citrus. So it was determined, as it was determined in the previous planned updates, we again don't expect groundwater withdrawals in the lower Kissimmee Basin to cause impacts to those minimum flow and level water bodies in the Southwest Florida Water Management Districts. Jumping into water resource development projects here and Chapter 7. The map on the right is showing the locations of water resource development projects planned in the lower Kissimmee Basin and some of their components. These projects are covered in Chapter 7, and we provided an overview of those during our first stakeholder meeting in April. Major water resource development projects in the lower Kissimmee Basin include the Kissimmee River Restoration Project, the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Restoration Project, which the current plan under consideration includes 55 aquifer storage and recovery wells that are denoted in the red circles on this map here. The Lake Okeechobee Component A Reservoir, shown in purple or pink here, that reservoir proposes 200,000 acre feet of storage in the basin. So that's quite significant. There's also the Northern Everglades and Estuaries Protection Program and numerous dispersed water management program projects that also capture and store excess stormwater. So these larger water resource development projects are primarily the responsibility of the South Florida Water Management District and serve various purposes, including meeting one of the previously stated goals of water supply planning, protecting and enhancing natural resources and future water supplies. Other types of water resource development projects that also contribute to protecting water supplies include research, such as the monitoring and modeling conducted by our hydrogeology group, grant programs for conservation and alternative water supplies, and the development of resource protection tools. So in summary, these are some of the different efforts and projects that are in place to save water, create water, and assess the sustainability of water resources while planning for growth. And Chapter 7 goes into the details on those programs in place in the Lower Kissimmee Basin. Chapter 8 of the plan provides the future direction the district will take over the coming 5-year period until the next water supply plan update. This slide lists a selection of some of the strategies included in the future direction chapter. Over the next 5 years, the district will continue coordination with utilities, agricultural operations, other state agencies and stakeholders, while continuing implementation of environmental restoration projects that contribute to water supplies, while also encouraging conservation practices and use of alternative water supplies. So in conclusion, it was determined that all the future water needs of the region projected through 2045 can be met with appropriate management and conservation. And this includes water resource development projects and completions of capital projects that increase storage. And here's where we're at with the schedule for completing the plan update. We've completed the draft of the plan that was posted for public review and comment on October 14th. Written comments on the draft are due by November 13th. And that way we can make any needed changes and incorporate them before we present the plan for governing board consideration and approval on December 12th. And our goal here today is to provide an overview of the draft plan, encourage you to review and provide your feedback. The documents posted online at the link at the top here, with the chapters and appendices combined into one document that's searchable and has hyperlinks to help you quickly navigate to the information that's of interest to you. On this webpage, you'll also find the PowerPoint documents, recordings of our stakeholder meetings, and additional water supply plan information like our support document, which supplements each of the water supply plans with additional detailed information. To provide your comments on the draft plan, or if you have additional questions after today, the quickest and easiest way to send those to us is using the email addresses we have listed on the slide at the bottom. And we also, on this slide, we also have some directions listed here and another link if you're interested in signing up to receive email notifications of our future water supply planning public meetings. All right, and yeah, next slide. With that, we'll wrap up my part of the presentation and open it up for questions and comments.
Thanks, Chad. If anyone has any comments or questions for Chad, please raise your hand. That was a lot of information, but that was the entire draft plan, so. You can always email them with any thoughts and questions if you think of something later today. No raised hands?
No.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, our presenters and panelists, and governing board member, Mr. Butler. Appreciate your attendance as well. Just a reminder, in a few days following the workshop, the recording and the documents will be posted to the webpage. Thank you again for participating. We appreciate your coordination. And please provide any written public comment by the deadline we talked about today. Thank you for attending. Have a good afternoon.